Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Today we're going to have a look at this really fun image that was a submission for the Fabio Pavelli challenge on the spaceman. So basically the idea here is a pretty cute story with this little guy who's like the space little man, who's basically landing to landing from space because he's like his mother is asking him to come down for dinner. So I really like this story. It's really simple, but I think you can actually really easily understand it when looking at the image, which I think is the most important thing in terms of storytelling, when like the title or like the story makes sense with like the visual. So this is a really interesting thing, which means that basically I won't be talking much about the storytelling because I think it is on point and it's working. One thing I was wondering though, but it's just like a slight proposition, but I think it's good. But basically, like this idea of like this sort of big door, white door, to go downstairs, I was actually wondering if it maybe wouldn't be more interesting to have like a little bit more of the what's happening behind, and maybe have like the beginning of a stair or something like that. But I think maybe it's easier, and not even easier, but better to keep it more abstract. So this is good. One thing I can talk about, I think in terms of composition, it is fine. Having like a really simple, centered composition like that works pretty well. I think the lighting makes sense as well. I was wondering at some point if it wouldn't be quite interesting to have maybe like a little children light or whatever, like a dim light coming from another source, but I don't know, like I think maybe having like only one single like super strong light coming from from here would be better. So I guess it's fine. So mostly what I'd be focusing on is like details. So I think there's like a nice thing with the little toy here with like we understand the motion and like the sort of like ragdoll effect or whatever, like the physics. One thing I think that kind of that could be really improved is the hair of the kid, especially when like you have this sort of idea of like a young kid that just like took off his helmet, and you know that sometimes you have like half of your head that is like super flat, and then suddenly you have like some hair that just fly. And the funny thing is that since you have like such a strong backlight, you could actually have like a really nice effect of like this is something that would be super complicated to get in 3D, of course, but it takes like seconds to do it in Photoshop properly. So I would definitely suggest that. There's also something weird happening with the hair color, which seems like super red or super saturated, which is something I would be careful with. Just one last thing, just regarding the lighting, I mean, is I would add like a more like bloom effect on the fringes, or on the fringe of the lighting, so that it gets like lightly more, like has like a sort of optical effect, because otherwise this seems a little bit too, like the angles here, or the edges rather, are super sharp. A couple of things, but it's really like, it's going to be details, as I said. There's like this sort of thing that you should try to avoid, is like to get sort of tangent things when you have like a line here and this sort of thing that's sort of almost aligned too perfectly. So what you need to do in this sort of thing, in this sort of scenario, is to slightly move your object so that you can better read the actual objects. Another small detail here is regarding this little thing, because this looks like magnets, and whereas like we're on some sort of wooden thing, so you would have like more like pin things, you know, like this thing that would look more like something like that or whatever, whereas here it looks more like a simple magnet. So it's again like details, but in terms of details, this is really nice. I really like the sort of like small drawings that are put here. It works really well and gives like this sort of children kids room or whatever. I think it could have been taken a little bit further, because it still looks a tiny bit too too tidy or whatever. I was thinking, like, since we have like your drawer here slightly open, maybe it could be open even more, and you could have like some toys in there with something maybe coming out of it or something like that. Could actually be quite fun. There's one thing I have issue with is like the sort of specular pass that has been used and maybe overused, because I think it is sort of like counterintuitive to have such a strong light here and have it like backlit or reflected rather on like this sort of thing. It is nice to get like extra reflection, but I think the effect is a little bit too intense. So I would have made it like, for instance, for that kind of thing, it is quite nice to have it because it makes it look more like, at least you understand more the geometry. But here it is a bit weird, especially like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's too weird. Another thing that is a bit slightly annoying, or I mean like that could be improved, it's not annoying, is that the color palette is extremely neutral, and it sort of gets like harder to read objects in between like these values because they're all the same. So maybe it would be interesting to have this slightly darker so that you read better some shapes. In terms of texturing, I think it's really nice. Like the floor is really cool. There's like a lot of, you can see that the glossiness is, you have like nice glossiness variation, and so it makes like a quite realistic floor. One thing I'm sort of, I'm not concerned, but like I don't understand is why there's no actual shadows cast from this guy. It is not actually much of a problem, because maybe the issue would be that this guy would be completely in the dark, and maybe that's not that good, but still that makes me wonder. Just like details again, like still coming back to specular thing, I think it would have been nice to have like slightly, like using the specular map to have like highlights on the edges of the, like, what is it, like hammered glass or whatever that's called. But it looks really nice. One thing I was about to say is just regarding the details of the door. You can see here you have like the little thing, which is quite nice. Here you should have like the I don't know how it's called, sorry, but you see what I mean, the sort of lock or whatever, and you should have its like equivalent or whatever, or like the negative part that should be around here in the door. Another fun thing that I usually do when I have doors in like not perfectly new space is to get like the sort of like scratch, like circular one that is on the path of the door here, which is usually a nice detail to add. I really like especially like this kind of like small details of like the kid writing stuff on the wall, which is really fun, I think, and working quite well. Other stuff that could be interesting, what did I say here, bim bam. Yeah, just in terms of composition, I think this is working nicely. Like all the fact that everything is centered on this works nicely. It is good to have this, like you can see that this specular thing, or like the reflection we have here, is coming from something that is behind the camera, so it's nice. But again, as I was saying, I would be super picky on where to use this pass, so that here maybe I wouldn't use it, here I wouldn't use it. I would definitely use it on metallic surfaces because this makes them way more interesting. But again, yep. Other details that could be interesting to have is like this sort of like the plank thing that you're gonna have when you like usually have this sort of wooden door. Because although like this was a competition and I think you have a week to do it, so of course I'm not saying like, I understand completely that these kind of details are not there. I'm just saying like this is the sort of thing like if you want to take it to the next level and like whatever, I think it works nicely. In terms of color palette, again, I think maybe it's slightly too, there might be something to do. Although I think the composition relies more on like the hierarchy of light, so it's fine to have like a quite neutral or like sort of almost monochromatic base. So maybe it's fine actually. Did I have other stuff? I think it's fine. I think, yeah, just in terms of storytelling again, it maybe would have been interesting to add like one final thing. I think, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like, you know, this sort of like luminescent stars, or like, I mean, maybe it would be interesting to have like a secondary light, but it's not even like an emitting one, like a strong one, but just a simple, like, yeah, like those sort of green stars or whatever. This could be interesting. This is really cool, as I said, and I think it's fine. Yeah, there's like a lot of, not a lot, but like maybe a slightly too much noise, but this is okay because again, it must have been rendered quite quickly to fit into the deadline. So this is definitely not definitely fine. And it's always good to have a bit of noise, because when everything is super noise free, it sort of gets like feels unreal anyway. So this is fine. I think I'll stop here. Again, so yeah, it was really mostly about small details. So this kind of details apply to any interior renderings basically. But this is one of the things, is like, once you have a strong story and a strong composition that serves the story properly, then it all comes down to details and like fine-tuning stuff. So this is what this teardown was about. So hopefully you've learned interesting stuff that you can use in your next rendering, and I'll see you next time. Cheers guys, bye.